There are three universal constants in this galaxy: bureaucracy, bad timing, and the fact that no matter how advanced a civilization becomes, they never quite figure out how to make a decent cup of tea. I should know. I've spent the last 3 years as the only human maintenance engineer aboard the galactic research vessel Precise Calculation, which ironically was currently hurtling towards an unplanned landing on the ice planet Glacia 7. Engineer Winters, please explain why the backup reactor is not responding to standard restoration protocols, Captain Crust demanded, their crystalline appendages clicking in what I'd learned to recognize as maximum administrative annoyance. I looked up from the smoking control panel, trying to keep my face neutral. Well, Captain, I'd say it's because the backup reactor is currently experiencing what we humans technically refer to as a complete meltdown. I paused, watching the captain's crystalline structure vibrate in distress. But don't worry, it's only a small meltdown. Barely worth mentioning, really. From their station across the bridge, Science Officer Nema's tentacles twisted into what their species used for a frown. Engineer Winters, your use of the qualifier small appears inconsistent with the standard definition of complete meltdown. Please clarify this logical discrepancy. It was a joke, Nema. I sighed, remembering for the 1000th time that humor was still considered a peculiar human disorder by most of the galactic community. The reactor's shot, we're going down, and we'd better start preparing for a very cold camping trip. Security Chief Thrax, who had been hovering near the weapons console as usual, narrowed all four of their eyes. Camping? This is a serious emergency situation, not one of your primitive human recreational activities. Thank you for that insight, Chief Thrax. I turned back to the captain. The good news is, I've managed to route enough power to the landing thrusters to keep us from becoming a very expensive ice sculpture. The bad news is, a loud grinding noise from somewhere below deck punctuated my sentence perfectly. That's definitely the bad news. Captain Crust's crystals chimed in what I recognized as their species' version of a deep breath. Very well. We shall implement Emergency Protocol 7249B, subsection 12, paragraph 3. Procedures for unplanned planetary contact during research missions. I watched as they all rushed to their stations, pulling up official forms and beginning to file the proper documentation for our impending crash landing. 3 years in space had taught me that no matter how dire the situation, there was always time for paperwork. Captain. I gestured toward the rapidly approaching planet's surface visible through the main viewport. Maybe we should focus on the not dying part first. Just a suggestion. Engineer Winters, Nema interjected, their tentacles now typing on 3 different interfaces simultaneously. The proper completion of emergency documentation is crucial for maintaining orderly procedures during crisis situations. I glanced at my own console, watching as the external temperature readings dropped faster than my hopes for getting back in time for the Earth Championship cricket finals. Right. Well, while you're all filling out those forms, I'm going to go do something crazy and human-like, such as prepping the emergency survival gear. But that's not until subsection 15. Thrax called after me as I headed for the exit, file a complaint. I shouted back, already mentally cataloging everything I'd need to keep us alive on a planet where the average temperature made Antarctic winters look like a tropical vacation. As I jogged through the corridors toward the storage bay, I couldn't help but smile. For all their advanced technology and complex protocols, my alien crewmates still hadn't grasped one of humanity's greatest survival traits: sometimes you just have to wing it. The ship shuddered again, and I quickened my pace. Whatever happened next, I had a feeling it was going to make for one hell of a story. Assuming, of course, we survived long enough to tell it. And more importantly, assuming I could figure out how to make a decent cup of tea in whatever frozen hell we were about to call home. The landing was, to put it mildly, interesting. To put it accurately, it was like riding a malfunctioning washing machine down a flight of stairs while inside a tin can. By some miracle, or possibly due to Captain Crust's insistence on following the proper crash landing protocols to the letter, we ended up mostly intact on the surface of Glacia 7. Status report, Captain Crust demanded as soon as the ship stopped shaking. Their crystalline form was slightly askew, giving them the appearance of a drunk chandelier. All vital systems are functioning at 43% efficiency, Nema announced, their tentacles still somehow managing to type. External temperature is negative 211 degrees Celsius. Primary power systems are failing at a rate of, their tentacles drooped. That's not good. I was already pulling on my emergency suit, which I'd modified extensively after my first month aboard. The standard issue environmental protection gear was great if you were a methane-breathing crystalline entity or a silicon-based life form. For humans, not so much. Engineer Winters, Thrax barked, "Why are you not completing your emergency landing report form?" "Because," I grunted, checking the seals on my suit. "I'm more concerned with not becoming a human popsicle than documenting the exact shade of blue my fingers turned before falling off." That earned me 4 narrowed eyes, and what I'm pretty sure was an official note in my personnel file. Again, the ship's lights flickered ominously, and the temperature inside began to drop. While my alien crewmates huddled around their consoles, initiating what they called emergency temperature adaptation protocols, I watched in bemused silence as they proceeded to do absolutely everything by the book. A book that clearly hadn't been written with actual survival in mind. According to Regulation 5891C, NEMA announced, "We must first establish a proper chain of command for low-temperature emergency situations." Their tentacles waved a data pad. "I have prepared the necessary forms for all crew members to sign." "Excellent," Captain Crust chimed. "And Security Chief Thrax, please begin the standard security sweep to ensure no hostile indigenous life forms take advantage of our compromised position." I looked out the viewport at the barren ice landscape. "With all due respect, Captain, the only hostile life form out there would have to be a very angry snowman." "Humor is inappropriate during emergency situations, Engineer Winters," Thrax reminded me, while simultaneously trying to calibrate their scanner with rapidly stiffening appendages. The temperature continued to drop, and I could see frost forming on the inner walls of the bridge. My crewmates' natural biology gave them some resistance to cold, but even they were starting to show signs of distress. Captain Crust's crystalline structure was developing tiny cracks, NEMA's tentacles were moving sluggishly, and Thrax's exoskeleton was making concerning creaking noises. "Perhaps," NEMA suggested, their voice vibrating with cold, "we should consult the Extended Emergency Protocols Manual, Section 47, regarding extreme temperature situations." I watched as they all nodded in agreement, and began pulling up the relevant documents on their rapidly freezing displays. The sight would have been funny if it wasn't so potentially lethal. "Right," I announced, standing up. "While you're all consulting your manuals, I'm going to do something absolutely crazy." "What unauthorized action are you planning now?" Thrax demanded. "I'm going to save our lives using this revolutionary human technique called making it up as we go along." I headed for the door. "Also, I'm going to need that broken food synthesizer from the mess hall, about 50 meters of hydraulic tubing, and whatever's left of the backup reactor's shielding." "But," Captain Crust's crystals chimed in distress, "that's not in any of the approved protocols." "Exactly," I called back over my shoulder. "That's why it might actually work." As I made my way through the increasingly frigid corridors, I could hear them behind me, still debating the proper forms needed to requisition emergency equipment. I shook my head, checking my suit's temperature gauge. We had maybe 3 hours before the ship became completely uninhabitable. Time to show them why humans had survived every ice age we'd ever faced, armed with nothing but opposable thumbs and the stubborn refusal to die in any way that could be classified as according to protocol. First step, figure out how to build a shelter, using nothing but spare parts and questionable engineering decisions. Second step, find a way to make tea. Because if I was going to die on this frozen rock, I was at least going to do it with a proper cup of Earl Grey in hand. Behind me, I could hear NEMA calling out, "Engineer Winters, you haven't signed the Emergency Innovation Permission form." Sometimes I wondered if humans were the only species in the galaxy who understood that survival trumped paperwork. Then again, maybe that's why we were the ones they always called when everything went wrong. Time to prove why. The nice thing about being a maintenance engineer is that you learn to see potential in everything. That broken food synthesizer, a perfectly good heat exchanger waiting to happen. Those hydraulic tubes? Future insulation. The backup reactor shielding. Well, that was just bonus building material for my absolutely not in the manual survival shelter. I was halfway through dismantling the synthesizer when NEMA's tentacles appeared around the corner, followed by the rest of them clutching a data pad. "Engineer Winters, I must inform you that unauthorized modification of ship equipment requires completion of Form 972B, Request for Non-Standard Usage of Standard Equipment." "NEMA, I said, not looking up from my work in the time it would take to fill out that form. We'd all be frozen solid. Besides, this synthesizer hasn't worked right since that incident with the attempted coffee production last month. We agreed never to speak of that incident again, they said, their tentacles curling in remembered horror. But I still must insist. Hey, want to help me break this thing apart faster? I interrupted, holding out a wrench. I promise it's more fun than filing reports. They hesitated, all their eyes blinking in sequence. Is that allowed? Probably not, but it might save our lives. Your choice. To my surprise and delight, they actually took the wrench. I will document this as emergency scientific observation of human engineering techniques. Whatever helps you sleep at night, buddy. We worked in what passed for companionable silence, broken only by the occasional question from Nema about why humans seem to enjoy destroying things so much. I was explaining the concept of therapeutic demolition when Captain Kurtz and Security Chief Thrax found us. Engineer Winters. Thrax's exoskeleton was now covered in a fine layer of frost, making them look like a very angry, very cold prehistoric insect. What is the meaning of this unauthorized destruction of ship property? I held up what used to be the synthesizer's main heating element. This is going to keep us alive. Along with, I gestured to the pile of parts I'd collected, all of this. Captain Kurt's crystals chimed in what I recognized as maximum bureaucratic distress. But where are the design specifications, the safety evaluations, the risk assessment matrices? Right here, I said, tapping my temple, along with about 20 years of human experience in jerry-rigging solutions to problems that shouldn't exist in the first place. Jerry-rigging? Nema tried to pronounce the term while simultaneously attempting to categorize it in their database. It's a human engineering principle, I explained, starting to assemble my creation. The art of making something work using whatever you have on hand, held together by hope, physics, and sometimes a bit of tape. That cannot possibly be a reliable methodology, Thrax protested. I connected the last power coupling and grinned as it hummed to life. Want to bet? Over the next hour, I constructed what I proudly dubbed the thermal capsule Mark 1-inch, or as my alien crewmates insisted on calling it, Unauthorized Engineering Implementation Device 47X. It wasn't pretty. In fact, it looked like something assembled by a drunk architect with a grudge against conventional design. But it worked. Using the synthesizer's heating element powered by the salvaged reactor shielding's residual energy, insulated by repurposed hydraulic tubing, and held together by what Nema would later describe in their report as highly questionable adhesive applications, I created a shelter that could keep us warm enough to survive. It's impossible, Thrax declared, watching as the temperature inside the capsule rose to a comfortable level. This violates at least 73 safety regulations, probably more, I agreed cheerfully, making some final adjustments. But you know what it doesn't violate? The laws of physics. Usually, Captain Kurt's crystals had stopped cracking, which I took as a good sign. This methodology, it is not documented in any official procedure manual. That's because if you tried to document human improvisation, the manual would just be one page saying "figure it out," followed by 300 pages of increasingly creative swear words. Nema, who had been scanning the capsule with growing fascination, turned all their eyes toward me. But how did you know it would function? I didn't, I admitted, checking the power distribution. But I knew the principles were sound, and sometimes that's all you need. That, and the stubborn refusal to die on a planet named after an ice cream flavor. What is ice cream? All three of them asked simultaneously. I patted the wall of my jury-rigged shelter. Tell you what, once we get off this frozen rock, I'll introduce you to another miracle of human engineering. The art of turning frozen stuff into delicious stuff. The capsule hummed contentedly, maintaining a bubble of warmth in the middle of our failing ship. My alien crewmates huddled inside, still looking bewildered but noticeably less frost-covered. Now, I said, pulling out my emergency kit. Who wants to learn about the human ritual of emergency tea making? The looks of horror on their faces almost made the whole crash landing worth it. Almost. Here's the thing about tea that most non-humans don't understand. It's not just a beverage. It's a solution to most of life's problems. Computers broken, have a cup of tea while you think about it. Spaceship crashed on an ice planet, definitely time for tea. Alien crewmates looking at you like you finally lost your last marble, Make enough tea for everyone. Engineer Winters. Captain Kurt's crystals chimed with concern as I rummaged through my emergency kit. What possible benefit could a heated plant-based liquid provide in our current situation? I pulled out my prized possession, a battered metal tea tin that had survived 3 years of space travel and countless questionable situations. Captain, what you're about to witness is thousands of years of human survival wisdom distilled into one perfect ceremony. Is this another one of your jerry-rigging procedures? Nema asked, their tentacles wrapped tightly around a data pad, presumably ready to document this new example of human insanity. Even better, this is British engineering at its finest. I held up my modified heating element, salvaged from the wreckage of the food synthesizer. Watch and learn. The next 20 minutes were spent giving my increasingly baffled audience a master class in emergency tea preparation. I'd modified my standard-issue water ration packets with a special filtration system, because if there's one thing humans learned early in space travel, it's that recycled water doesn't have to taste like it's been through a robot's digestive system. First, I explained, setting up my makeshift heating system inside our thermal capsule. We need to get the water temperature exactly right. Too hot, you burn the tea. Too cold, you might as well be drinking something from the ship's waste recycling system. There are optimal temperature requirements for hydrogen dioxide consumption. Nema's tentacles flew across their data pad. This was not included in the xenobiological briefing on human dietary needs. That's because it's not about needs, Nema. It's about civilization. I carefully measured out the precious tea leaves. Any human can drink water. It takes culture to make tea properly. Security Chief Thrax, who had been watching the proceedings with all 4 eyes narrowed in suspicion, finally spoke up. This seems like an unnecessarily complex procedure for simple nutrient intake. I gave them my best, oh, you poor uncultured alien look. Chief Thrax, humans didn't become a spacefaring species by accepting simple nutrient intake. We got here by constantly asking ourselves, how can we make this better? And what if we added boiling water to these leaves? The water was heating nicely now, creating a small cloud of steam that made our thermal capsule feel almost cozy. I'd rigged up a condensation collection system too, because when you're stranded on an ice planet, you learn to think ahead about water supplies. You see, I continued, carefully pouring the hot water over the tea leaves. Humans have a long history of turning survival situations into comfort opportunities. Sure, we could just huddle here conserving energy and waiting for rescue, but where's the style in that? Captain Kurt's crystalline structure vibrated in what I'd learned to recognize as deep confusion. Style is not a factor in survival protocols, and that, Captain, is why you're all standing there shivering while I'm about to enjoy a proper cup of Earl Grey. The steam rose from my jury-rigged teacup, formerly a power coupling housing, thoroughly cleaned. The trick isn't just surviving, it's surviving with dignity. The aroma of bergamot filled our shelter, and I watched with amusement as my alien crewmates' various sensory organs registered confusion, curiosity, and what might have been reluctant interest. Would anyone like to participate in this human survival ritual? I offered, pulling out more improvised cups. There was a long moment of hesitation before Nema's tentacles reached for one of the cups. I shall document this as a xenoanthropological research opportunity. That's the spirit. I poured them a cup. Though I should warn you, this might fundamentally change your understanding of liquid refreshment. To my surprise and delight, both Captain Kurtz and Chief Thrax also accepted cups, though Thrax insisted on scanning theirs for toxins first. I decided not to mention that their scanner was about as useful as a chocolate teapot in our current situation. Now, I said, holding up my cup, we should toast. It's traditional. Toast? Is this related to the heated bread product you attempted to create in the synthesizer last month? Nema asked, their tentacles curling around their cup with remarkable dexterity. Different kind of toast. This is where we raise our cups and say something meaningful about our current situation. Ah, Captain Kurt's crystals chimed thoughtfully, like the filing of an oral mission status report. Close enough. I raised my cup. To human ingenuity and alien tolerance of human ingenuity. May both continue to keep us alive. They all stared at me for a moment before awkwardly raising their cups in imitation. The sight of a crystalline being, a tentacled scientist, and an insectoid security chief attempting to participate in a human tea ceremony while sitting in a jury-rigged shelter on an ice planet, was something I wished I could have captured for posterity. Now, I said, after taking a sip of perfectly brewed tea, let me tell you about this other human survival tradition called storytelling around the campfire. Or in our case, around the questionably repurposed heating element. Is this another unauthorized morale maintenance procedure? Thrax asked, their frost-covered exoskeleton finally beginning to thaw. Chief Thrax, when it comes to human survival techniques, everything is unauthorized. That's what makes it work. And so as the storm raged outside and our ship slowly froze around our little bubble of warmth, I introduced my alien crewmates to the fine art of swapping increasingly exaggerated survival stories over hot beverages. By the time I got to the tale of how I once fixed a quantum drive with nothing but chewing gum and optimism, even Thrax had stopped checking their security protocols every 5 minutes. Sometimes survival isn't about having the right equipment or following the proper procedures. Sometimes it's about making tea in impossible situations and pretending everything's perfectly normal until it actually starts to feel that way. Besides, I thought as I watched Nema attempt to explain the chemical properties of Earl Grey to an increasingly fascinated Captain Kretz, if we're going to be stuck here until rescue arrives, we might as well be civilized about it. Now if I could just figure out how to make scones with spare reactor parts, we'd really be getting somewhere. The rescue ship methodical analysis arrived exactly 48 hours after our crash landing, which was precisely according to standard emergency response protocols. What wasn't according to protocol was what they found. Instead of a frozen wreck and a group of desperate survivors, they discovered what I had started calling Wintersville, much to Thrax's continued disapproval. The rescue team's leader, Commander Vix, stood in our thermal capsule with an expression that suggested they were trying very hard to maintain professional composure. Their crystalline structure, similar to Captain Kretz but with more elaborate formations indicating higher rank, sparkled with barely contained bewilderment. Let me ensure I understand this correctly, Commander Vix said, consulting their datapad. You constructed this shelter, using parts from a food synthesizer, hydraulic tubing and reactor shielding. Don't forget the emergency rations packaging, I added helpfully. Turns out the foil lining makes excellent insulation when you layer it properly. Who knew freeze-dried space food would actually save lives? Nema, who had spent the last 2 days documenting every aspect of our survival techniques, eagerly stepped forward with their own datapad. Though I must note that the term methodology may be overly generous for what appears to be a series of educated guesses and what humans call gut feelings. They're not just gut feelings, I protested. They're carefully calculated risks based on years of experience and, okay, yes, some of it was gut feelings. But my gut has very good engineering instincts. Commander Vix turned all their attention crystals toward Captain Kretz. And you authorized these modifications. Captain Kretz's structure vibrated in what I'd come to recognize as embarrassed admission. Not exactly. Engineer Winters implemented these solutions while we were still processing the proper emergency authorization forms. It was a crisis situation, I explained. Sometimes you have to choose between following regulations and following physics. Physics tends to be more reliable in a pinch. The rescue team's chief engineer, a silicon-based being named RX, was examining my improvised heating system with an expression that mixed horror and fascination. This power configuration violates at least 15 safety protocols. They paused, running another scan. However, the efficiency rating is impressive. Necessity is the mother of invention, I said sagely. Also, desperation is the father of let's try it and see if it explodes. And did anything explode? Commander Vix asked, their crystals vibrating with concern. Only small things, I assured them. And technically that waste recycling valve didn't explode so much as it underwent rapid unplanned disassembly, which, by the way, led to our current very efficient water reclamation system. Nema's tentacles waved excitedly. Oh yes, Commander, you must document this. Engineer Winters created a complete closed-system environmental cycle using nothing but damaged ship components and what they called creative pipe fitting. The rescue team spent the next hour documenting every aspect of our survival setup, with Nema providing increasingly enthusiastic commentary about human innovation techniques. I noticed that even Thrax had stopped referring to my modifications as unauthorized structural violations and had begun using terms like tactical adaptations instead. But what I still don't understand, Commander Vix said, gesturing to our now extensive tea station, is why you devoted so much effort to creating this beverage preparation area. Morale management, Captain Kretz answered before I could, their crystals chiming with what almost sounded like pride. Engineer Winters introduced us to the human concept of comfort in crisis. It proved surprisingly effective. Extremely effective, Nema added. I have recorded a 47% increase in crew cohesion since the implementation of what Engineer Winters calls tea time and story hour. I tried not to look too smug. Amazing what a hot drink and some good conversation can do for team spirit. The rescue team's medical officer, Dr. Plex, had been quietly analyzing our vital signs. Despite the extreme conditions, all crew members show remarkably stable health readings. Even accounting for different species' cold tolerances, these results are unexpected. That's because we didn't just survive, I explained, starting to pack up my precious tea set. We made ourselves at home. It's an old human trick. If you can't get out of a situation, get comfortable in it. Commander Vic spent several more minutes inputting data into their pad before finally addressing us all. This incident will require extensive documentation. The unauthorized modifications alone will need at least 7 different review boards. But, they continued, their crystals shifting to what I hoped was an approving configuration. Given the successful outcome, perhaps some of these techniques should be studied for potential implementation in future emergency protocols. I nearly dropped my tea tin. Are you saying you want to officially approve my jerry-rigging methods? Not exactly, Commander Vix clarified quickly. But we may need to reassess our understanding of human engineering principles, particularly in crisis situations. As we prepared to evacuate to the rescue ship, I caught Nema trying to salvage pieces of our thermal capsule. For research purposes, they explained, their tentacles carefully wrapping each component. Also, I have developed a preference for your Earl Grey. The standard nutrient solutions now seem inadequate. Captain Kretz approached me as we made our final checks. Engineer Winters, I believe I owe you what humans call an apology. Perhaps there are times when immediate action takes precedence over proper documentation. Captain, that might be the nicest thing you've ever said to me. I grinned. Don't worry, I won't tell anyone you said it. Wouldn't want to ruin your reputation for perfect protocol adherence. Most appreciated. Their crystals chimed softly. Though I must insist you file a complete report on all modifications made during our emergency situation. Already done, I said, pulling out my own data pad. I had a lot of free time while waiting for the tea to brew. As we boarded the rescue ship, I heard Commander Vix asking Captain Kretz about the possibility of adding human adaptation protocols to the standard emergency procedures. I smiled, knowing that somewhere in the vast bureaucracy of galactic civilization, a new regulation was about to be born, one that essentially amounted to when all else fails, let the human engineer get creative. And maybe, just maybe, they'd finally add proper tea-making facilities to the list of essential emergency equipment. A human engineer can dream, right? 3 months after our adventure on Glacius VII, I found myself standing in front of the Galactic Research Fleet's Engineering Standards Committee, trying not to laugh at the absurdity of the situation. They had called me in to explain my innovative survival methodologies. Bureaucrats speak for how did you break every rule in the book and still succeed. Engineer Winters, the committee chair, a quantum state being named Dr. Flux, shifted through several probability patterns before continuing. Your actions have created quite a stir in the engineering community. Good stir or bad stir? I asked, genuinely curious. Because there's a difference between stirring things up and stirring things together, especially when making tea. Please refrain from tea-related analogies, one of the other committee members, a silicon-based entity, interrupted. We've received quite enough of those in Science Officer Nema's 347-page report. Only 2,347 pages? I grinned. They must have left out the part about the improvised tea strainer. Dr. Flux flickered in what might have been exasperation. The committee is more interested in your unconventional approach to emergency situations. Specifically, They consulted their notes. What Captain Krutz described as alarming tendency to solve problems by creating new and technically unauthorized problems. I prefer to think of it as solving problems by creating solutions that haven't been approved yet, I corrected. Much more positive spin. The committee spent the next 2 hours grilling me about every detail of our survival experience. They were particularly interested in what they called my intuitive engineering matrix, which was really just my habit of looking at broken things and thinking, I bet I could make something useful out of that. To my surprise, they didn't seem entirely horrified by my explanations. In fact, some of them were taking notes. The committee has reached a decision, Dr. Flux announced finally. We are implementing a new set of protocols, emergency innovation guidelines, unofficially known as the Winters Protocols. I nearly fell out of my chair. You're naming protocols after me, the person who breaks protocols for a living. Not exactly, they clarified. We're creating a framework for controlled innovation in crisis situations. And they flickered reluctantly. We're adding a mandatory course in human adaptation techniques to all engineering training programs. That's how I found myself, 2 weeks later, standing in front of a class of alien engineering students, trying to explain the fundamentals of human improvisation. Today's lesson, I announced to the bewildered group, is Creative Problem Solving 101, or how to make something from nothing without filling out forms in triplicate. In the back of the classroom, I spotted Nema, who had insisted on attending every session for research purposes. They had their datapad ready, tentacles poised to document every word. First principle of human engineering, I continued, holding up a broken power coupling. Everything is potentially useful. Second principle, the manual is more of a suggestion than a rule. And third principle, sometimes the best solution is the one that makes everyone else ask, what were you thinking? To demonstrate, I proceeded to turn the power coupling into a miniature heating element capable of boiling water. The students' various appendages, tentacles, and sensory organs all registered different levels of shock and fascination. But how do you know it will work? One crystalline student asked, their structure vibrating with confusion. That's the beauty of human engineering, I replied, setting up my tea set. Sometimes you don't. You just try it, learn from what goes wrong, and keep adjusting until it does work. We call this troubleshooting, emphasis on the shooting part. By the end of the first semester, I had a waiting list for my classes. Turns out there's something appealing about learning to think outside the box, even for species that don't quite understand what a box is. Captain Krutzt, now promoted to fleet administrator, occasionally sends me messages asking for unofficial consultations on various engineering problems. I pretend not to notice that they've installed a tea-making station in their office. Thrax, still maintaining security on the precise calculation, now fully repaired and upgraded with what they call emergency adaptation modifications, has started keeping a secret stash of Earl Grey in their security station. They claim it's for protocol research purposes only. And Nema, they've published 6 papers on human engineering methodology, started a research project on the cultural significance of tea in crisis situations, and somehow managed to create a new academic field called Comparative Emergency Innovation Studies. As for me, I'm still breaking rules and fixing things in ways that make the bureaucrats cringe. But now I do it with official approval, sort of. They even gave me a new job title, Senior Emergency Innovation Specialist. I asked if that meant I could skip filling out forms for unauthorized modifications. They said no, I do it anyway. Because at the end of the day, the universe doesn't care about protocols or procedures, it cares about what works. And sometimes what works is a crazy human with a wrench, a problem to solve, and a desperate need for a proper cup of tea. Speaking of which, I should wrap this up. I've got a class to teach on advanced applications of duct tape in zero-gravity environments, and I haven't even filed the paperwork for the unauthorized modifications I'm planning to demonstrate. But first tea, because some traditions, even unauthorized ones, are worth keeping. End of report form 7249X. Documentation of unauthorized success through authorized channels, filed by Jack Winters, Senior Emergency Innovation Specialist. Note: this report was submitted with tea stains on page 3. The stains have been officially documented and filed under evidence of ongoing human innovation processes.